Finland is 23rd for suicide and yet is the UN's happiest country. So what's going on? Let's get into it. So I'm a data analyst and I have the figures at my fingertips. And we have here the World Happiness Report from the UN. If we go to page 19, you can see Finland at the top. And it's not the only one that's a little bit anomalous. There's also Uruguay quite high up on the list. Let's see now, 28th. And it's not enormously high up, but it's way too high for a pretty suicidal country. There is obviously something going on here, and it's worth having a look into this topic and also producing our own happiness index. And there are ways to do that. If we look at the methodology, this is the actual World Happiness Report website, and it has the method by which they've done this. And they have this single question, which they ask participants. Please imagine a ladder with steps numbered from 0 at the bottom to 10 at the top. The top of the ladder represents the best possible life for you, and the bottom of the ladder represents the worst possible life for you. On which step of the ladder would you say you personally feel you stand at this time? Okay, so what this isn't is the question, are you happy? Or are you a happy person? It's not really a happiness study. You could argue that this is a satisfaction study because you can have people who are satisfied with their life because they accept what they have, but are also depressed. An instance of that might be a parent who has children who are doing well or seem to be doing well, yet they themselves are depressed. But they're satisfied, and therefore they could answer this question with a higher number than you might expect for someone who is asked, are you happy? Interestingly, they do actually address that. The question does not mention concepts like happiness, well-being, or satisfaction, so it can be easily translated and understood in many different languages. So you can see the reasoning here that the word happiness is probably quite difficult globally. And so they've avoided the subject entirely by using the device of this particular question. But it does mean that it's not, strictly speaking, a happiness index. Now, I remember reading the previous studies in previous years, and interestingly, they had a similar question to this, but it was only one of many other questions. And most of the questions were based on things like, does the country have a good education system? Does the country have a good welfare system? And very much a reflection of a social democratic politics, in fact. And I would say that, therefore, it really wasn't a happiness index at all. Whereas this one is sort of related to happiness in a sort of a way. But what's really fascinating is that Finland has been consistently top despite the change in methodology. So considering their high suicide rate, which we can see here, this is age standardized, which I think is actually not very meaningful. But there is a non-age standardized version, which is down here. And we can see that Finland is number 23. And on this list, we also have Uruguay. And there it is, pretty high up. Actually, I don't think this list is sorted. Okay, there we go, we've sorted it. Uruguay is number 5. Finland, I can tell you, is number 23. Now, this is not the only study that seems to have this kind of result, because when you look at mental health, you get the same effect. So if we look at the Global Mind study, and in this case, I haven't gone to original sources just because that's not the thrust of this video, but the AI tells us that Uruguay is, I think that's about 10th in the good mental health stakes, despite the fact that they're number 5 for suicide. Well, that's a very odd result. So this motivates the data analyst to come up with their own happiness study. Now, I can't do what the World Health Organization has done, which is to use Gallup. And Gallup, here is their methodology. It's not just that question, it's how they did it. So they phone people up mostly in countries that have widespread phone usage. And in poorer countries, they did it face to face. Now, one could actually say that that in itself is going to cause a bias, because in some middle-ranking countries, there might be widespread telephone usage, but nevertheless, you might be missing out on 30% of the population who are poorer and don't have telephones. That might be even truer of very poor countries, but since they're doing face-to-face in very poor countries, then it's not such an issue, is it? But the middle rankers could have this as a problem. And it will presumably be the poorer who are more susceptible to suicide. So that means a built-in bias, and the results are not fully representative. Now, if the UN Happiness Index is flawed, we can produce our own flawed happiness index by alternative means. I can't telephone 100,000 people, but what I have done, and I've done it for you already, I'm not going to go through the process, is get data from the World Bank and put it together. And the data is suicide, murder, and death by illicit drugs per 100,000 people. Add those together and then rank. So here we have it. And you can see by inverting the list, because obviously it's really a misery index, by inverting the list, we get a notional happiness index. Very notional, very flawed, but pretty interesting. On the index, we can see that Indonesia is at the top with a very low rate of death. Those are per 100,000 people. So it's not some sort of weird rank or percentage factor or coefficient or anything like that. That's the number of people who have died in a year by those three factors. And the reason why this is flawed is because I think we can see that these are mostly Muslim countries at the top. And the flaw, therefore, is that it may not reflect the degree of happiness. It may reflect things like societal pressure from religion against suicide, also societal punishments for crimes. But having said that, Indonesia does have a reputation for having a very jolly bunch of people. Bali, for instance, which is not actually Islamic, has a very good reputation for absolutely delightful locals. Consequently, it's a very popular destination for not just holidaymakers, but people who want to work remotely. But let's skip over the Muslim countries because we can't really account for their numbers in terms of happiness. But I think we can for other countries, particularly Western countries. And so we can see that the first European country at the top of the list for happiness, or at least notional happiness, is Greece. And this is despite the fact that Greece has had a very rough ride in the last 10, 15 years economically. Then the next, if you want to include Israel, it's really part of the Middle East, but it's a fairly westernized country, isn't it? Is Israel. And then after that, we have Italy. I'm not totally surprised because Italy has such excellent food and landscapes. Of course, they have their rotten parts as well, but I think in general, they've got a good thing going. And then we have Malta. That's quite a nice result. A tiny little country, absolutely packed with people, and relatively speaking, jolly. I mean, nowhere near as jolly as Indonesia, perhaps. But what we don't have up here is Finland and Uruguay. So if we actually invert the list again, so turn it back into a misery list, and here we are. At the top, we've got Lesotho, which is a small country within South Africa. And South Africa itself is 2 steps down, and they have astronomical rates of death. I visited South Africa recently, and my brother told me that murder amongst the youth is just rife. We've also got other interesting results. Belarus, Russia, very high up there. Also, Ukraine. Ukraine is not a happy country, and this is before the war. In fact, what I've observed looking at the map is that there seems to be a sort of radiation of misery coming from Russia. It's an epicenter of unhappiness. Now, you might be interested to know where the United States is. United States it's not 85 because the row number on the left-hand side is not representative anymore. So it's about 50 away from 85. So 35th most miserable country. And it is arguable that in the last maybe 50, 60 years, there has been quite a radical change of culture in the United States. What about the United Kingdom? Let's invert it again and make it a happiness index. So now the rows on the left-hand side line up quite nicely. So if we could just scroll down to the United Kingdom, it's really not that bad. 54th, so we're in the top 1/3 almost. Now I have a whole lot of other statistics here which I've put in because I find it interesting, that I collected from all over the place, Wikipedia and so on and so forth, not just the World Bank, but the basic statistics came from the World Bank. These other ones came from different sources. I had to clean them up and of course match everything up with XLOOKUP, etc., etc. In fact, I think I used VLOOKUP. I was trying to look for relationships between things like alcohol, corruption, earnings, average earnings per person in dollars, agricultural population density, that's the next column, ease of doing business, see if that correlates, and abortion and milk. And what I can tell you is, well, I'm not going to tell you much because I'm going to leave that to another video, so you'd better subscribe. And you might be interested in why I was looking at milk. That'll be in the next video. So make sure to hit that subscribe button. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I don't think I've got anything extra to say that won't go into the next video. But if you have any questions or suggestions, then I would love to know and I might be able to do something about them.